I think it's very arrogant to suggest that the right person always gets the job, but there is an extra degree of stability in that funding which actually improves your ability to be more flexible and to think about longer term prospects. So you're less at the whim of the market changing or dying. We have this kind of sense that good quality user experience really matters, and it makes a huge difference to our customers and to our success. Most people can't argue with the numbers. This is why we try and measure things so much and say, well, if we did a thing, this changed the thing.
Hi Kim, well, thank you so much for joining me today. So for everyone watching, listening, Kim's VP of Product Design and Insights at fintech startup called Metal. So yeah, why don't we kick off with you telling me a little bit more about your career into design and design leadership?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks so much for having me today. So I started life, as we were chatting about before, very early on, actually studying computer science, and that's what I studied as my degree. And I came all the way from that as an engineer, actually I got back in engineering C#, all the way through kind of several different NGOs in France and in Italy, and then made my way back to the UK, where I cut my teeth in a company called Datica. And so that was when we did the kind of first journey planner and all this great stuff, which was really exciting back in the day. And then from then, I moved forward and I kind of made a role. This was at the beginning of kind of UX, in between engineering and design. And through that, I then transitioned across several different agencies, including kind of Idea, and others, through to working at Google, which I did for a couple of years, and becoming manager and design manager there. And then from that, I kind of moved from place to place, managing larger and larger teams until I ended up here at Metal and NatWest Boxed.
Nice, amazing. And what made you decide to take that transition from bigger tech into the startup world?
Yeah, interesting. So I've always really enjoyed being in a smaller organisation where you can have your fingers in more pies, you can do more things. I've really enjoyed that kind of flexibility. In larger companies especially, it's not always the case, but there's sometimes a tendency that you're in a kind of more, the product is already kind of set to some degree, so you're having impact and you have a large numbers of users that perhaps you're impacting, but you have less of that kind of early stage flexibility than able to stick your oar in and going, I don't know, go and do this with a brand, or perhaps you want to have transition the whole product in a different direction.
Yeah, no, amazing. And I think this ties in quite nicely to my next question. Metal is obviously a startup within NatWest. So I think what a lot of people would be keen to know is what it's like leading a design team in that environment, and if there are any key differences with that setup compared to your more organic startups as well that aren't necessarily backed by a bigger organisation.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's probably worth going back to the kind of origins of Metal. So it started, I think, around sort of 30 to 50 people. I was there in very early days, and it was actually two different agencies that came together in the form of Capco and 11FS to kind of form the basis of the organisation. And then over time they transitioned out, and most people actually stayed in those two consultancies. What this has developed, or what this has meant, by having a kind of fully funding, fully backed by NatWest, has given Metal an incredible degree of flexibility.
Yeah.
If you look at your kind of standard model with a startup, you're VC backed and so on, you're under huge amounts of pressure, and you also have that VC fund breathing down your neck, asking questions about how you're doing, how you're progressing. Of course, it's not like we don't have that, but there is an extra degree of stability in that funding, which actually improves your ability to be more flexible and to think about longer term prospects.
Yeah.
So you're less at the whim of the market changing or dying, and you have this kind of degree of strength to be able to build through difficult moments and actually come up with better long-term solutions. So from the outside, it might look kind of more difficult, but actually it's incredibly beneficial.
Yeah.
And the other huge benefit is that, of course, a VC will provide you with expertise in particular areas, which is great. But NatWest itself, given that Metal is a small business banking product, provided us from the beginning a huge degree of expertise in the kind of more complex areas of regulation and areas like this, which again was hugely helpful, and also just in legal support, which we wouldn't have been able to get access to easily otherwise. So big differences, and I think many of them very positive.
Yeah, no, definitely, it sounds like it. And then I guess on the topic of runway and what you would expect in your more traditionally built startup versus Metal within a big organisation, what does predicting runway and those like projections look like for you as well compared to being in a startup? Is it a case of having more time to be able to implement certain things, or is it still a case of having KPIs that you have to meet at X points?
Absolutely. So, of course we have targets. The whole organisation runs on an OKR basis. We're very much modelled on the kind of Spotify or large tech kind of organisation approach. We don't work in the same way as the main organisation. It is very much a splinter group. We exist and have our own ways of working which are separated. And the reasons for that are speed.
Yeah.
The reason a company like that sets up something like Metal is because they want to compete in fintech and they understand that fintech moves quickly. It's like, okay, well, here you go. Here's the keys to the car. Off you go. We'll just sit over here and just make sure you don't drive too fast. So in terms of runway, yeah, I don't think there's a huge difference. I mean, in terms of the pressure, I think it's just more the vagaries. That NatWest, being a large organisation, can tolerate market changes to a greater degree, whereas a smaller fund would look at what's going on, perhaps say, you haven't made it in time, or would change or move the goalposts on you. Whereas here, what we've been able to do is look out over a kind of number of years and say, well, these are our targets, this is our hockey stick, and this is how we want to run to. And given that we've been hitting those numbers consistently, we're able to consistently fund.
Yeah, nice. And what does design success look like to you and your team?
Yeah, really good question. So I think within the team and then more broadly in terms of any organisation, success in design sits at that intersection, around that intersection between the product and the customer, or the people that are using it. And so a successful design team is one that's translating the problems that we understand from our customers into great solutions. And so if you're getting really positive feedback from your customers, if you're getting product market fit, these are all signs of great design work. More broadly, the things that I sort of take special pride in within the team is actually looking at the quality of the customer experience. So we measure this quite a lot within the organisation. And so we try and take quite a data-driven approach to saying, we've got a good and workable system here. Not only are people finding out people using these different features in a way that we want to, but in addition, we can measure that success. You say, this is how well they're doing it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I guess for you, what areas do you measure and what do you define as like customer happiness, like your optimum of your customers using every part of the product as it should be?
Yeah, so these are kind of two different areas I would quote. So one being your more classic metrics, which is just straight up kind of, okay, we've got some things, say for us, like funding or use of payments or dropouts on certain journeys. So these are the things that we would measure. And then more broadly, we look across just a particular journey, a particular experience. We're just introducing those more kind of say-style metrics where we can say, okay, how much did somebody enjoy this journey? And then using that data, we're not looking for answers, we're looking for anomalies. So if we take a particular journey and say, this is a baseline, and then it's dropped once we introduce something, that's our trigger to go and do some more user research and understand some qualitative work, what happened and why, and then gain those insights, understand those problems, and then run a cycle, try and pattern it.
Nice. And I guess when it comes to sharing like your design success with the wider organisation as well, what does that look like for you and the team? Is it very much everyone is very much in the loop with what is going on, and how do you find it's best to communicate that wider?
Yeah, good question. So the team itself, so the model that we have is an embedded model. So at least on the product design side, every single product designer is embedded in a product team. So they work directly with the product owner and a cross-functional group of engineers, and the tech lead and engineering manager managing those engineers. So it's very much the kind of the classic model. When that team delivers work, they will take it to show and tell, another kind of larger presentation to say, we did a thing, it works, we should all be excited, which is great. Sometimes designers will present in that, or if it's a piece of work which is somewhat separate. So for example, recently it was a great piece of work like one of our senior designers is looking at modularization across the product. So taking all of that work, that was a presentation she took to the entire company to say, hey, this is an entirely different way of doing things, this is why we've done it, and this is the benefits we have to expect.
Yeah. Nice. And do you feel like that's really helped with like design buy-in across the wider organisation as well?
Yeah, I think so. Overall, we have really great buy-in into design and just into the importance of the customer, understanding people and what they need. And that's a kind of a pure product perspective. So I think across the organisation, we have this kind of sense that a good quality user experience really matters, and it makes a huge difference to our customers and to our success as an organisation. Sharing and presenting is one method of doing that, but also just being involved at the very beginning, at the very early stages of ideation, or actually understanding and translating those problems also really helps to people to see that designers are creating individuals that come up with really useful and interesting
Yeah.
ideas and ways of solving problems, which is really how I see the discipline.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess outside of metal as well, have you ever experienced in previous roles where it has been like trickier to get design buy-in across the wider organisation, or any advice for people that might be struggling with that as well?
Yeah, interesting. I'm trying to think. There's definitely been places where it's been harder. Struggling to think of an exact example. What I do remember though is some of the agencies that I've worked in, where it's been harder to sort of translate across into the organisation you're working with, to express like, okay, well, this is the benefits, how it's going to work. I think in all these situations, and there is no silver bullet, but it's always been for me like a top-down and bottom-up approach. So you pick on an individual stakeholder that you think is vaguely amiable, and then you kind of really layer it on with them if you can get direct time with them to present the work. And then to produce, most people can't argue with the numbers. And so if you can demonstrate, this is why we try and measure things so much and say, well, we did a thing, this changed the thing, then suddenly people are going, oh, I could see why I care about this now. We had bad experience before and we had a huge number of complaints. Now we have a good experience, we don't have so many complaints, we have less pressure on our ops agents, and so on and so forth. And then the bottom up is, I've always found if you can find a way to embed within teams, this is better.
Yeah, definitely. It's quite an interesting one as well, I think, from a user research perspective, because, we all saw it a lot of the time. User research can be a function that when hardships are faced, redundancies can be made quite quickly in that area. And it's quite an interesting one because, like you say, they're very fundamental to actually being able to show design success and linking it back to the business goals. So it's an interesting disconnect that can be experienced in other companies.
Absolutely, yeah. I know that there were a lot of layoffs in Meta and other places, but there's kind of a lot of inroads made into the user research team. I think there isn't really any design without user research. I think it's kind of fundamental. I would argue there isn't really any product without user research. Now I know there's a sort of trend towards like product owners and so on kind of doing their own research, and I stand fully behind that. I think that is something that needs to happen. I do also believe, however, that user research is a complicated and difficult discipline. And so within our own organisation, the work that Slope, who's the head of research, she's fantastic, but is that we've built a more democratised approach. So we have a very lean user research team, but that team itself is then able to, basically we've trained up the rest of the organisation into people who do research. It's a relatively common phrase these days, and those individuals are then able to carry a lot of what I would call the simpler research. So the actual kind of evaluative research. So you've got a prototype of something you want to test, and that's done by the designers and the product owners, and ideally by the engineers being engaged too within the team. Then more complicated, longitudinal, or longitudinal studies, or things we actually need to go out and do kind of more evaluative work, but proper interviews and so on. That's where the user research team steps in, again with their support, but they are leading that work. That's the more complicated analysis, which I think very much resides in that discipline. Yeah,
definitely. And that democratised user research model, something that I think is quite rare. It's not something that I hear spoken about a lot within companies. So how has that helped you with the business goals? And I think what advice would you have for people that would like to bring this model into their organisations as well?
Yeah, so it's like many models, pros and cons. The pros, I think, are very much that you've embedded within the organisation now a kind of fundamental connection to the user, because everyone's responsible in a way for making that connection. So you can't just farm out your solution and say, now find out if it's good or bad. You have to be a part of that process. So huge positive there. Getting the actual training is key. And so we already had a lot of people that were very interested, since our product team was kind of very keen to be involved in research, which is great. In some areas of the organisation, in other areas less so. So it's been absolutely right, and that's understandable. So we spent the time to explain, well, this is how this benefits you, and this is how you can get more work done if you engage and embrace this. Because really, any piece of research that you do ultimately needs to gain value by being translated into the people that are going to use it. So yes, more complicated work, and our research team does a great job at actually kind of running those sessions, not just presenting, but actually kind of thinking up what that would mean, to kind of how might we alter that research. We're getting people to actually take on board if we did this ourselves, then the knowledge is already in the team. We don't need to go through all these extra steps. So really the way we've done it is to engage with those people, get buy-in, some from my CPO and from others, to say, okay, we've made our own training essentially, and so we run that, and we have stickers and certificates and all sorts of fun stuff to say well done for completing it. And yeah, we take that through the organisation, and it's become quite positive. If there is a problem, is that now we're in a state where that's great, but our organisation has grown significantly, and now in a place where we're doing a lot of research at the time that the actual research team is taking on, while still leaning over people's shoulders and making sure that they're doing best practice in the rest of the company. So it's a lot of willow.
Yeah, I can imagine. And so have you found that wider teams that are now involved in research, there's been improvements in their teams in terms of performance and the results that they're getting as well?
I think you'd find it hard to kind of directly show performance improvements, but where you can see a massive difference is just in the speed. Yeah. So, by sharing this out, we're then able to do more research more consistently, which then just by its very nature improves on the quality of what you're outputting. Yeah.
And then playing devil's advocate a bit, with this model, obviously it's great that you've got everyone involved in the research. It can be really good, like you say, when your budgets might be tighter and investment might be harder in more specialised researchers. At what point, how do you then justify the need to bring in more user researchers when that time is right?
Yeah, so this is actually a conversation that's going on in the organisation right now. I think a lot of the way that you need to look at I look at any of these things is just in terms of prioritisation. So I kind of share with my boss, the CPO, and the other members of the sort of leadership team, and especially now with it boxed, discussed a little bit earlier, that okay, we need to know the market, we need to understand these customers. So this is what the team's capacity is. This is what you want. So, this is not matching. And that's basically why I have that conversation. And then, of course, it comes down to a wider question of, are we willing to tolerate that? What else would we be willing to give away on? And that's really the crunch point for me, is that you're able to kind of take those conversations and say, okay, you want an answer to X question? Great. This is the work that's coming in. You simply can't get this answer inside of 6 months. And the response, of course, is that's not acceptable. You go, right, well, something's got to give.
Yeah, of course.
So that's normally how I go about this. And it's really positive just because we have so much of that positive energy coming from the company in the first place. So we're not going out there saying like, oh, hey, we're thinking about doing this piece of research or, make work. It's much more that kind of people come and go, okay, we need an answer in this space, or we need to understand the problem space here better. What can you get us?
Yeah, of course, the investment is already there by a big part.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and then data science and analytics sits within your team, which we all know is very rare for a product design team to have that fall under that umbrella. So what benefits have you seen with this setup, and has it been a setup that you've had since the beginning of joining Metal?
No, so it's not since the beginning. So within my role, I kind of obviously design and insights, and that's kind of really how we see data science and analytics within the organisation. And to be clear, they're extremely closely tied to the platform engineering and data engineering. Yeah. So that's something that's very much there. And I guess I have enough background in data and computer science to kind of be sort of dangerous. But really, the benefits and the reason it's set up in this way is that because data science, as we see it, data analytics is fundamentally involved in the gathering of insights, just as user research is, they really form part of the virtuous circle. That's the way that we try to make it work. So if you have a data science team going away and they're discovering an anomaly, and they say, wow, this is really interesting. We have hundreds of dog walkers with Dalmatians on the platform, and that's our kind of major thing. Why is that? Yeah. Then that kickstarts a question which we can input a hypothesis into our user research team, and so they'll say, okay, great, how can we explore this? Let's design a study, let's get some people involved, and then go around the process, maybe come up with some solutions, which then the analytics team will support in monitoring and capturing the results of, and go around again. So it's that relationship which I think is really powerful inside our organisation to kind of help the qualitative and quantitative science of research. I kind of see a lot of data science as a form of research, perhaps a predictive and descriptive form, but that's how I share it.
Nice. And then in companies where that hasn't necessarily been the setup for you before, have you noticed a really big difference in maybe the team's not working as closely together in previous companies, and is it something that you would encourage other companies to be doing more of?
Yeah, interesting. Well, I suppose it really comes down to kind of where you see data analytics data
Yeah.
science living. Do they live under engineering or do they live under product? And so I see them living under product because that's ultimately the customer that they're serving. They're spending all the time kind of managing and maintaining, either creating dashboards or looking higher up the chart into that prescriptive kind of space, which you obviously want to kind of eventually move your way up into, away from kind of simple descriptive analytics to something which is looking into the future. Benefits of doing it this way, I don't know if I would force someone to move. It really does depend on how successful it's being. I'm looking back in previous places I've been in. My criticism has been, and perhaps this is getting the vibe that this is how I like to do things, is just to make things more embedded. And that's what works so well with research. And we also talked about the democratization of that. The analytics to me is in a similar vein. By bringing it in and syndicating it through the organization, we kind of have people that are roughly allotted to different areas of the company, directly working with their product folk in these areas.
Yeah.
You get a huge degree more integration and buy-in. Whereas if you kind of sit the company or sit that group outside in more of an agency-like model, where requirements come in and answers come out, it's much more black box, and you get much less of an understanding of what the question is. And that's really where it's definitely some senior members of our data science team are doing really well these days, which is that kind of, hey, I'd love to know this, and then spending half an hour going, I don't think that's actually what you want. What you like is this, and being able to really get to the bottom of what people's problems are, rather than just reacting to the request.
Definitely. Sounds like you've really married product design, engineering, and tech very closely together. And I think by the sounds of it, having that really embedded model has been very beneficial when it comes to, I hate to say the term, but the seat at the table. It seems like you've really got a good balance across the board.
Yeah, I think so. Things can always be improved.
Yeah.
There are definitely limitations with this, and there's a huge degree by doing this of somebody takes time off or moves role. It's definitely more painful because you have less visibility across a group. So that kind of key person dependency definitely works in this model. There's no getting around this. But no, more broadly speaking, yes, design has a great seat at the table. All these disciplines do, honestly, which I think is really important. And myself, obviously being part of the leadership team for a period, all of that has really helped to kind of cement that this is very important, and there's a huge degree of buy-in from the rest of the organisation.
Yeah, definitely. And then I guess moving on to more of a growth and scaling perspective, obviously you joined Metal initially at 50, you're now I think over 500, am I right in thinking? So scaled very heavily, you've got a team of 30 yourself, so keen to hear a little bit more around the growing pains that came with that, and I guess, the differences in potentially what customer success looked like back in the day compared to what that is now for you.
Yeah, I was casting my mind back thinking about this question. So those early days when you just got a small group of people and you're just powering through something very exciting. I think the largest changes in terms of growth that I've seen as we've gotten bigger is just about continuity and consistency. Yeah. It's easy when you're a smaller group just to kind of lean over someone's shoulder and go, what the hell's that?
Yeah.
I thought you were doing that. Oh, okay. Let's get together and come up with an idea that we both agree on. Whereas now, that consistency is harder to maintain, even though the design system is far more mature than ever it was back in the day. And that problem is one that I think I am willing to accept. There are some things that I don't want to move, because the only way that you can countermand that in a big way is to start going through a serious sign-off process, serious review, which I abhor. So nobody has the sign-off process. It's up to individual product designers especially, and to the same degree with research and content design, to come up with the solutions themselves and have critique and review, but ultimately it's their decision, as long as they stick within the boundaries of kind of the core brand and design system. Yeah. So that, and that's something that I want to continue. It will always create problems, but the kind of benefits of speed that you get from that, I think, are, and also just autonomy, is incredibly important. So as you get bigger, that gets worse, and will inevitably get worse and continue to get worse. And I think it's much within the role of a leader to kind of sit there and accept that there will be mistakes, and to say that's okay, because the payoff for those mistakes, or I say mistakes, but those problems, is that we have greater autonomy and we have greater flexibility within the team. and I will sort of stand kind of at
Yeah.
that door. It's very easy when things get bigger to just go more process
Yeah, of
and
course.
more review, and I need to be in control, and I'm not seeing everything that's going on anymore.
Yeah.
But I think it's
It's
very important to be
unhealthy.
able to just go, it's okay,
Yeah.
let's let it go. So that's been the biggest change, and then more broadly across the team, as we mentioned earlier, there are lots of different products now.
Yeah.
We have internal product tools, which there are two of, which are equally vast. So it becomes a question then of how do you continue to create a team that has a sense of cohesion?
Yes.
People are working in very different areas, but not just putting in loads of meetings. And that's something that we work very hard on with our huddle and so on, but there's definitely more space for improvement there.
And then I really like what you said about letting go of control. I think where the pain points can come is when people don't want to let go of that side, and not being able to have eyes on everything can be really difficult for some people. But I guess with the whole process of obviously not going through sign-offs, have you found like introducing rituals, for example, or any, I say process, but has there been anything that you have introduced to minimise the risk of potentially like mistakes or problems evolving?
Yeah, so the encouragement is very much per area or discipline. The expectation is that anything that you do in any scale or size, you need to be sharing with the other designers in that space. We use Slack a lot, and so people spend a lot of time putting around what we call like ABCs. So people just throw up like, I've got 3 ideas. Everyone asynchronously, just have a look if you could, and then really a huge amount of emphasis on feedback, on critical feedback.
Yeah,
and that's, I think, vitally important, not only to improve the quality of what people are making and kind of improve, make sure that that consistency is there, but also on the other side, I believe very much that undertaking criticism makes you better.
yes.
Not getting the criticism, giving the criticism.
Yeah.
So this is kind of, I read this ages ago, which I thought was fascinating. A lot of surgeons sat down and they were critiquing each other's surgery skills. When they did the critiquing, the criticism that they got, no improvement. But everybody that did the criticising got better.
Interesting.
Because they were observing mistakes that the other person was making and going, oh, well, I do that.
The mentally
I'm not going
checking
to do that
themselves.
anymore. So I think that's why, for me at least, the critical element is so important, because you get this learning and improvement just by literally going through the effort of having to really concentrate on somebody else's work and seeing things that could be improved, or questioning things that could be improved. And the last thing, which is more of a recent part for me, which is I'm really enamored by radical candor and all this kind of concept, and definitely something I probably need to improve on, but there's that element within the team of just being, strong opinions held weekly, to be kind of hard on one another and questioning of like, well, I think this, and then forcing the other person to kind of justify their position. Not the way that's mean or uncaring, but you can keep this with humour or whatever else, but really asking what else could we be doing better. And I think that as well is really helping to hold us all to account and to be honest.
Nice. And then obviously you have a very customer first mindset at Metal. As you have grown and SLT has moved obviously naturally a bit further away from the users, how have you continued to make sure that the customers are at the heart of everything that's being done?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's kind of 2 components here. So one is the research itself, which I think is incredibly important. Like literally we're starting another big piece next Wednesday, Thursday, and we were actually testing the script on some of our leadership team to be like, your senior leaders, we're going to be interviewing senior leaders, so we can test this, which is a great way to engage them.
Yeah.
So getting people involved in that response of like, what are people saying out in the market, what are people saying about us, I think is incredibly beneficial. So that research really, really helps. And then the side point is, it's just getting things in front of people. So in my role, as much of that is my position to kind of see what that people are doing, to encourage them to set up meetings with and or present to senior leadership to demonstrate this is what we've done and this is why it makes a difference. And then I also take it upon myself in my one-to-ones with senior leadership to carry the work of my team up to that and say, hey, I would like to discuss this topic here. This is what we've done. This is the impact I think it's going to have. And by and large, I think my experiences of leadership teams more or less is, people are looking for value and they're looking for results. So rather than I try not to just take the work and say, can I have a pat on the back, we've done a good job here, but we've done this and I need something from you to take it further. and then what is it going to give me, like what are the results from that? So that's been my approach.
And would you say that the design and research team as a whole empowered to have that voice as well from themselves? So I know sometimes it can feel like design teams, when they do scale beyond a certain point, design teams don't necessarily have that face time with senior leadership, and that can be half the problem sometimes.
Yeah, I think I would argue that's not the case yet. It definitely will become more of a problem as we get any bigger. Especially the senior leaders of the design team are known to kind of the leadership team, especially some of them have been here from kind of very early days and are very important to the organisation, not just in terms of their work, but also culturally. As we grow, I think this is going to be a problem that I'm going to have to try and find answers to. In the main, at the moment, anybody, and that's a great thing about kind of Networks Box to Metal, is that anybody can drop a meeting into the diary of anyone in the leadership team.
Nice.
Go through, somebody might manage that diary,
Yeah.
but you can get there. There's no one's going to say, what do you want? You want to stick in 15 minutes, half an hour, and have a chat. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of kind of outreach and skip levels that kind of happens anyway. But as you've alluded to, once you get beyond a certain scale, that becomes harder and harder. So I think we're going to be looking at more of those kind of large sharing sessions, and also just getting the visibility, even at kind of at the -1, -2 levels, where we can actually, and those are really good at the moment. All those meetings happen, and our senior leaders actually turn up to our kind of design product meetings and all the rest of it. So at the moment, people are still making space in their diaries for that, but inevitably that will come harder and harder.
Yeah. And do you feel like as that becomes harder, you might bring in more like design leadership in terms of design managers, or what do you envisage the future?
Yeah, so I think that's definitely something we're looking into. It's going to bring in more design leadership or design directors within the space. Very much like what I'm looking forward in those is, I think, more T-shaped managers. So actually looking to have some individuals that are very focused either on design ops, or very focused on kind of bringing in the what I would call like cross-company initiatives, things which I used to do, which I have less time for now, where you can take something and say, right, we want to do a service mapping of the entirety of our internal tooling system because we think it's really beneficial to drive some problems. Okay, great. Who's going to lead this piece of work? Who's got the time? The people in the squads don't necessarily have the time. And as you get more and more squads, you end up in a situation that less people are actually looking across everything, and people are, if not siloed, they're more stuck in the kind of deep focus on the product area that they're in.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be where we'll go.
Yeah, I think design operations is a massive value add for teams, especially even this, like you say, the startups, the scale ups. I think what you normally see design operations is in those more established, bigger organisations. Obviously, NatWest has design operations across the board as well. Do you feel like there is a sweet spot at what point you bring design operations into a company that is more startup scale up focused?
I think we should have brought it in a while ago to ourselves, and that's definitely a mistake that I've made. We should have brought it in earlier. It's hard to say. I think when you start kind of when you're starting to hit those reuse kind of elements, but honestly, I think you could do it very early. I mean, if you could afford it and find somebody that's a bit of many hats, somebody that's able to have good design system experience and design ops working at the same time as being a kind of individual contributor in the team, would be ideal. But the reality is, as we know, like there's huge speed benefits to having this and consistency benefits. You can then afford to have people in which are perhaps more on the UX side of things and closer to product, and with less focus maybe on that kind of interface kind of side of design, by having a really strong, robust design system. I think you can do this relatively early if you set yourself up in a good way. It can be very beneficial.
Yeah, definitely. And then on the topic of obviously UX versus interface and people being more heavy, obviously we saw the progression from your split like UX, UI specialisms into end-to-end product designers. Do you still see at the moment, like the next couple of years, it's still being quite a focus and demand for end-to-end product designers, or do you see at some point a return of specialisms?
Yeah, maybe. I think you end up more in the specialism space actually, to be honest, kind of earlier on, when you just need to set up a a kind of a language, a design style. I think with any team, when you're hiring, you want to be looking for a mix that complements each other. So I wouldn't want to have all product designers that are all kind of massive UX background and kind of heavy research focus necessarily. You want to have like a nice spread. That said, I think product design is very much here to stay. The expectation, I think, of the market overall is do more with less right now, and the product designer is that. In some strange ways, we've actually ended up in this kind of unicorn space that everyone was flipping the table on 5 years ago and saying this is impossible, you can't do this. And it's true, I still think it is impossible to be the best of all trades, but I do think it is possible to have a specialism and then be able to be good at many other spaces. So will we see a full return? I'll be honest, I don't think so.
No.
But,
it's supply and demand.
Yeah, completely.
And then on the more like scaling your team side of things, obviously when you joined, design team was a lot smaller than what it is today. Keen to hear your thoughts on hiring processes, interview processes, and potentially how that differs. Obviously, being part of an established organisation that does obviously have that set processes. How is it hiring within a startup within that space?
Yeah, so we have almost complete control over our own hiring process. So we get to set our own and decide how we want that to be. The process that we run is I'd say fairly lean, or maybe about average in terms of the number of steps. We were discussing earlier that there's a kind of move towards now within the market of asking people to do more earlier outside of the steps. I've always been skeptical about this. I think for two reasons. So one, asking somebody to spend a lot of time on something outside, you're no longer comparing apples with apples. You will get the most keen candidates will do the most, but the most keen candidate is not necessarily the best candidate. So you may get experts or very good people that simply don't have the time to do this for you, and you'll put them off from your job as a result. The way that this has kind of shifted to me now is we try and do as much in the sessions as possible. We do a lot of emphasis on kind of earlier work and how it's presented. And then, of course, there's also just a lot in the industry of, who they worked with and how they worked with those individuals. And that I take that as huge. It's very important to me. So referrals that happen within an organisation have massive value. The only criticism on that, of course, is that you do end up homogenizing, and you have to be aware of your own unconscious bias. So, that's something that I definitely try and look out for in terms of our hiring, is to try and avoid that sort of like, I hired this person because I liked them, and because they liked me, then they recommended their friend who's also like them, and suddenly you end up in this space where everyone's great, but similar thoughts and similar ways of doing things. But of course, you do want people sometimes that do think differently and are, if anything, kind of not a good fit, because then you actually get much more creativity coming out of that. So, that's where we've sat. We have a kind of relatively straightforward hiring process, and to say, kind of good control over that at the moment, which is really positive. It will change over time, and I think we'll probably move that forward a little bit more now in this space. Going in this modern market. Yeah,
definitely. And then obviously being at Google previously, what would you say the key differences are in that hiring process with big tech versus the startup one?
Yeah, so obviously big tech, and anyone who's done one of those interviews will know it's kind of a whole day, and you do kind of 4 or 5 interviews, and you get lots of talks and lots of people. I do think they run the process incredibly well, and I've been on the other side doing the interviewing as well. It's a really kind of well-oiled machine, and they spend a lot of time as well. One of the great things there in an organisation about scale is that you can spread the load. So internally, if you do a lot of interviews, you'll come back and you have some sort of rating and go, okay, Kim consistently is too nice, and it overscores people. And so they're not, which you won't know about, but there'll be an internal rating which will recalibrate you down. And so this is really powerful. When you've got a big enough pool, you can really start to average out. You can fight those unconscious biases, and you can also get a great degree of consistency. In your startup world, it's very different. I think personality, of course, is important in any job, but it's really important there. If you're a small group of people, you're going to work very hard together and have a kind of unified mindset. You need to be able to get along. Whereas perhaps in a larger org, you like more on the technical and so on, and say,
Yeah.
okay, that's more important, or at least that's okay. And also, you may be hired for a role that you like, I can even work with this person in. So you're looking more kind of clinically at what they're outputting. Whereas I think in that startup, fit and organisational fit is paramount.
Yeah, definitely. I think it was quite interesting what you said earlier in terms of the trend of asking too much from people up front before even being in that process. I think from my side, what we have seen, where obviously the financial difficulties had happened with a lot of companies, it has meant that it is very much like a company-driven market at the moment, with more candidates looking than what normally would be the case. So I think what we have seen outside of the clients that we're working with is unfortunately like a return of some bad habits anyway, whether that be the length of hiring process, the number of stages, take-home tasks, which really upsets me to see that, to be honest with you. But I think, what we really need to do is remember the experience of the candidates that are coming through as well, because at the end of the day, they still need to have faith and have a positive experience with the companies they're interviewing with, right? Because at the end, if they're going to be a permanent part of that team, I think it's important to obviously bear that in mind, and how you treat people during that process is going to be quite apparent to how they then get treated within the company.
Absolutely. And also for the people that don't get the role, you know, I think it's very arrogant to suggest that the right person always gets the job. Like, the interview process is not perfect.
No,
right? It can't
exactly.
be. So,
it doesn't fit everyone.
Right, it doesn't fit everybody, and people that don't interview well struggle, and that's a real shame. But more broadly, those people will often go on to succeed in other walks of life, and it's a small world.
Yes.
And also, if you want people to think positively of your company in the industry, which I do, and it's very important for the company too, then the hiring process is your window into the world for that group of people.
Yeah, definitely. I think it can be easy to forget how well, it's a big design community, but it's very small people talk, and word will spread quickly.
Absolutely, no.
Yeah, definitely. And then I guess from your side, what have been the best and worst interview processes that you've experienced, and how have you used those to really kind of influence how you've built yours as well?
Yeah, interesting. So I don't think I had like a really terrible...
You've not had any horror stories?
Horror stories? No, I don't think so. I think I had one years ago for an agency where I just went in and it was just a total role mismatch. So we had a nice chat, and it was like a paragraph within 10 minutes. I'm like,
this is not for me.
Well, quite like, they were just saying like, okay, well, just let me see how you're relevant for this role. I'm like, no, I don't have any motion graphics experience, so this isn't going to work. So that was probably the most painful, and I guess it could have easily been avoided if we'd spent a bit more, time kind of understanding exactly what was required. And then, by and large, the better experiences, like Google, and I've had interviews with kind of other large tech companies. It's those experiences can be really positive, because you kind of go in, and if you're handheld and you kind of walk through the whole thing, even though it's kind of quite nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
Going through that process can be really positive, especially going in and seeing an organisation. If you're really flipping from that kind of, I want this job, I'm not too sure, to like, oh wow, this is great, like I'm really excited to join this. Interviewing on Zoom or Hangouts or whatever, it's really interesting because it's so normal now. I don't really actually think about it anymore. Yeah. But it is a massive change from like, getting dressed up, going somewhere, wearing an alternate wear for something. It's making sure that you're okay to kind of, not quite walking out just in your whatever clothes, but like, just having that kind of very simple, like, this is what I do every day. I'm just going to literally swap over from one hour to the next and doing something else. So that's very different, and I think that also changes the dynamic of the interview a lot.
Yeah, it does.
And I think it's harder on both people. I think it's harder to come across virtually, and to get across kind of, if you're interested in how you feel, it's harder to read those micro expressions and body language, and vice versa. It's harder for the interviewer to kind of be clear in their questioning, and also to kind of gauge those moments of like, oh, I needed to give them a bit more time just to think of an answer versus like, oh,
Yeah,
they're a story, I'm going to talk over them.
Yeah.
So I think that's been a big change for me.
Yeah. Do you always try to have at least one stage in the office?
No, we don't actually.
Have you started
No,
fully remote?
we're fully remote because we are so fully remote by default.
Fair enough.
So we're a remote first organisation, so we're kind of contractually obliged to people to come in 2 days a month to the office. Most people turn up once a week at least, but it's that kind of it. You don't want to force people to do something which is actually not representative of the place they're going to work.
Of course.
So, but yes, I would like to do more in that space. And I think also there is, I'm sure you've talked to lots of people, but there seems to be a greater appetite to find a balance.
Yes.
I personally don't want to go back to kind of fully in the office, but there was definitely a kind of midway point, like a day a week, 2 days a week. A lot of people feel like that sort of interpersonal connection is important.
Definitely. I think there's 100% been a shift back towards hybrid working. Normally 2 days a week. We're seeing a lot more 3 days a week, to be honest with you, now from companies. But I think, it's very much apparent that people want that face time, that collaboration together. And I think, this year we've probably only had a handful of design roles that have been fully remote or remote first. So definitely kind of shift back, but I don't think it will move back to like full-time office working, because I just don't think it works anymore with people's like childcare commitments outside of work. So I think it's probably that's that happy medium for most people anyway. Yeah, definitely. And then I guess final thoughts. Where do you see the future of design leadership? Obviously, there's been a lot of turbulent changes recently, so keen to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Leadership overall within the design space, as I kind of spoke about previously in our chat. Design sits to me that kind of intersection between customer and product, and really what that intersection is solutions, is designing solutions to problems. So I see the whole discipline with the advent of AI and other forms of tooling, which are inevitably going to kind of lower the barrier to entry, so more people are going to be able to do more design, and I don't just mean that in terms of more designers, I mean product and engineering will be able to do more design. It's just going to happen. I don't see that as a bad thing, but I do see the role of design and design leadership is going to move more into that kind of solution space of probably treading more into product space. You've got the likes of Airbnb, everyone's becoming product marketers rather than kind of pure product owners in the past. Just not a huge change in terms of, I think that was a bit overblown, to be honest. But that's something that a product owner would always have to be responsible for anyway, but it's emphasizing it. And then that leaves a bigger space for the designer to step into that solution space of going, okay, what's it going to look like? How is it going to work? How is it going to solve this problem, which is that, is that product unit we have discovered? Yeah. So that's the way that I see the market moving, is further and further away from a perhaps kind of pure craft discipline, and more into that space of kind of how do we create elegant solutions to the problem. So definitely worries me to some degree, because there's huge benefits there, that's very exciting. Another flip side, just with AI in general, you look at when you take away craft, how do we avoid the homogenization of design? Which has already been going on for ages, but you can only see it getting worse. If you've got a tooling which says, I will generate you an interface, and that interface, if you're not steeped in kind of how these things are made, you'll look at it and go, cool, I want it to look like these other ones which I'm familiar with. Then inevitably the next person will make one that looks familiar to that one, and so on and so forth. Until you just trend towards a mean. Which is fine. None of those will be bad interfaces, they'll probably work really well, but they will not have that generative spark to go do something completely wild and do something very, very different. And that's the part that's most concerning to me, is that kind of like, how do you keep the spirit of kind of high risk creativity alive in a space where the tooling is helping you do so much more of that generative
of course
work.
It automates it to a certain degree, doesn't it? And it loses the creativity.
Well, potentially, right? Potentially not. Sorry, it's going to counter my own point now. And then, you can go the other way and be like, no, the AI itself will generate a plethora of different options. But I suppose that's always the way that the human is curating. And I think the designer is the ultimate curator in that space, being able to look at the solution options and go, well, that's the one I want to start with, and I'm going to take it from there. But how do you avoid that if all the options look similar? How are you getting to something?
Of course. And then I guess on the point you made about obviously design kind of moving more into that product space, the strategic side. What do you think that means for like the future of product and design teams as a whole? Do you see them potentially like merging together in the future, or do you feel like there would still be enough distinctions between the two?
Yeah, good question. I mean, you could easily see them merging. It wouldn't surprise me in the future to see like the whole thing becoming even more. So you end up with a product designer owner. This wouldn't shock me. I imagine that person would never sleep, but there's certainly a space where that happens.
The new unicorn.
Well, I mean, you can see, right? You just get more and more crunchy. You just go, okay, we'll just do everything.
Yeah.
You have full stack engineers. I mean, it's all part of a similar logic. Especially maybe in those kind of early stage startups where you get that anyway, where you'll have like a CPO, CDO, if they were a designer originally doing both roles. So I think I see that kind of merging happen. Whether the two teams merge together, potentially, or a kind of new third discipline just emerges, which we don't have a name for yet, which also wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's going to be a lot of exciting changes that happen. I'm really interested to see how the roles just evolve over the next couple of years.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me. This is great. Thank you.